This is the Indigenous Echoes podcast. I am joined by Dr. Charlene Aqpik, and we're going to talk about her work as a forensic scientist. And in this podcast series, we'll be talking about MMIP in Alaska. Okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Koyana for having me. So I'll speak my language to introduce myself, if that's okay.
Of course.
So Uvanga Charlene Apok, Anupaxiska Aqpik, Chinik Mugarunga, Sulina Chirvik Mugarunga, Savaktunga Data for Indigenous Justice me. So my name is Charlene Aqpik. My Inupiaq name is Aqpik. My family's from Gullivan in White Mountain, Alaska, and I work at Data for Indigenous Justice.
Thank you so much. Okay, tell me a little bit about Data for Indigenous Justice.
Yeah, so this is a nonprofit organization that stewards and documents the cases of missing and murdered Indigenous people here in Alaska. And it really started from a grassroots effort. It came from the families that we serve. And so here in Alaska in 2018, we wanted to call attention to this issue and raise awareness, only to find there was no data being tracked. And so families came and shared their stories of their loved ones, gave us names, and that began the hard work of the database. And so we've continued to track that and then use that for change.
Got it. Thank you so much. What drew you to this group or to form this group?
Yeah, again, when people share the stories of missing or murdered loved ones, it's heart-wrenching, and they do it because they want change. They want justice. They want something to happen. And so when so many families came forward sharing their stories of what had happened, there's a responsibility to that, right? They don't just share with you and you say, okay, and move on. I knew that people came forward because they want something done about it. And so my responsibility to being a story keeper was that I needed to do something for change. And so collectively we unite those voices through data, through stories, and we use it for change and say, hey, this is really an issue. This is what's happening. It's been happening over time. And so that really was in reciprocity with the families, that they gave their story and shared their story, and then we use it to make sure that something's done about it.
Thank you. So what exactly does it mean to be a forensic scientist and gathering this data? What do you do exactly?
Yeah, so I identify more as like a story keeper, right? I'm a researcher by training. We home a database. I'm kind of nerdy. I love to learn. And I have a passion for social justice, right? And so there's this intersection where we have an issue that is huge, a crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people. And oftentimes families or people on the front line of advocacy don't have the data that they need to back up what they're saying, or to point to and say, hey, this is what we know is true. And then we also have research and data that doesn't always work on the front lines, that doesn't know what's happening real time on the ground, with families and community. And so our work really builds that intersection of data with social justice, particularly for missing and murdered Indigenous people. And so with that, we're able to say, hey, this is really happening. These are the cases. This has been documented, and this is what the change that we want to see, right? And so it's this important intersection of giving the power of data to social justice and to families who these are their true lives. These are the true stories, and then we're able to use that. A great example is in the bill that was passed last year, SB 151, right? We did that with partners. Lots of people came together across the state, but a lot of it was because we were able to say, here's the data that we know is happening, right? So it's this powerful tool that we can come across different sectors of work too. I really love that about data is, people can have all sorts of backgrounds. You can work in law enforcement or science or news or things like that, and we can have this shared piece of information then that we can come together on, and I think that that's really powerful.
Okay, got it. So tell me a little bit about SB 151. What was the process to trying to get that, that push to get it passed?
Yeah, I want to first uplift the families, right? Families carried these stories for so long before there were advocates, before we had organizations and nonprofits using their resources. So really, first and foremost, it came from the families advocating. And then collectively, we heard their voices and were able to put together reports and data. And then I partnered with a really amazing partner. I think you got to talk with Kendra Kloster, but I jokingly call her my co-conspirator, but she has the policy mind to really put the pieces together on that, and with our other organizations that we work with. But we've been working on a bill draft for years, and it wasn't getting anywhere. But again, we put together the data with policy. We worked with partnership with the state. We got to know the Department of Public Safety. We talked to local law enforcement. We really got out there and got to meet people and come together again, like how can we create solutions moving forward? And so what arose out of that, and from what we were hearing from families, was just a starting point. But right now we have that bill included mandatory cultural training for the Department of Public Safety. And it's not just a one and done, it's something that has to be renewed. But really that hopefully improves communication between law enforcement and our communities, where sometimes if someone's from the outside in, there might be miscommunication or misunderstandings. And so there's mandated cultural training. There's also mandated data entry into a federal database called NamUs. And again, that's because there's lots of different data systems that don't always talk to each other, but if we can have a central one where at least we're inputting, that's useful. And so that passed as well. So the Department of Public Safety enters into the federal database their cases, so that's always updated. And then it also made sure that we have two positions, two missing and murdered Indigenous peoples investigators in statute. So those positions are now continually funded. There's 4 of them right now, but that bill ensures that there's at least 2 covered in statute so that the casework can continue, right? Because what we didn't want to see was all this advocacy, all this work being done, getting these investigators in, and then with any administration that could stop. So we want to really protect those investigators doing their work.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Tell me a little bit about Kendra. How did you guys, we've actually spoken before, so
great.
I know a little bit about how you guys met, but explain it a little bit. How did you guys meet and how did you guys end up collaborating?
Yeah, so at the time I wasn't working in this nonprofit sector. I was, again, like I mentioned, I'm a researcher by training, so I was working in tribal health research. And after that rally that I mentioned, collecting the names from families and everything like that, she reached out to me and she said, "Hey, I heard you're doing something about MMIW. You want to meet?" I was like, "Sure." And so we had coffee and we just shared information about what each person was doing and shared ideas about what we'd like to see happen. And we said, "Hey, let's just keep meeting." And so we would meet on Tuesdays. And to this day, now we have 5 Indigenous-led organizations that meet together every week on Tuesdays to do this work. And so we partner with my organization's Data for Indigenous Justice, but we also work with Native Movement. They do a lot of grassroots organizing and on-the-ground work. We partner with the Alaska Native Justice Center, and they do direct services with families across the tribal justice system. And then we work with the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, and they equip tribes and build tribal courts and assist tribes with lots of resources, technical resources on this issue. And the Alaska Native Heritage Center, they always bring like this really important cultural piece of healing that's so essential to this work. And so we have 5 Indigenous-led organizations that came together from this, all from me and Kendra having coffee, and she's brilliant. She is the policy side to, I know nothing about that. Like that was new to me. Again, being in research, it's a different field. But last year when we came together, we went to Juneau, we did this advocacy, we had a group of 25 Indigenous tribal leaders fly down to help support this bill. And I got to see her world, meet with all the representatives and see how it works and be there. And then shortly thereafter, we had our data summit here in Anchorage, where I had all the data people come and we're talking about like how this works with MMIW and human trafficking. And she got to see my world of like piecing it together, and so I'm just really grateful for her sisterhood, her partnership, all the skills and talents that she has and brings to this work. we're like really compatible co-conspirators.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's really great that you guys are able to see each other's worlds like that. It's like two worlds colliding.
Yeah, in the best ways possible.
Yes, definitely. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that rally. I know you mentioned that that was where you started receiving names and that was where everything kind of started blossoming. Can you explain what was it like to be given these names? And this, I would figure it might be a little bit of a responsibility that was handed over to you. What was that process like?
Yeah, I want to uplift Native Movement as an organization because they've been putting together rallies and really being the wind beneath the wings of lots of community organizers in this state. And they were the ones that really led that being able to happen for our people at that rally. And so, taking 2 steps back on the global scale, we saw Canada release that first report in 2016. And I think every Indigenous community at the time was like, oh my gosh, that's happening to us, but we didn't have the term or the names to say that. But sadly, so many people resonated with that. And so when that report came out, we're like, that happens here. And then Urban Indian Health Institute put out that report in 2018. And that was the first report in the US about this, and that again, took a lot of effort. And then the rally happened. And so we're like, okay, we have the term of missing and murdered Indigenous people to work off of, right? And when families shared their stories, well, first of all, organizers, the community organizers wanted to read the names of loved ones at the rally. It's really powerful to read each name and to acknowledge that life and the legacy of that person. Yeah. And when we wanted to do that, you couldn't pull it from law enforcement. You couldn't pull it from any database. You couldn't look it up, and families just came forward and shared, and it was, again, I think that's why I identify as a story keeper of holding that story carefully, witnessing and their truth, and walking along people in that journey of incredible loss. And sadly, lots of people resonate with it. A lot of times people say, oh, I heard about that, and then I didn't realize that happened to me and my family, this person. I remember that story now. And we're really powerful when we come together, But that first year of reading names was really difficult. It's a hard task to do, but it's an important thing to speak out and for people to hear the names of their loved ones so they're not forgotten.
My next question is, what has been the most moving or positive response to this work that you do?
Yeah, I was recapping having the bill pass, right? That feels like a historical, huge win that I was overwhelmed when it passed, and so many people gave testimony to that. It was a huge lift from partners and tribal leadership and families, and you might think that is a huge, and it was, and it really matters, and it's going to make a difference, and it's just a starting point. But there's moments with families that really keep me going, and that really, I remember this is why I do this work, right? And one of those moments was we also do a lot of community building where we come together in a good way, doing a healthy activity like beading, a cultural activity, or a 5K, Oh, wow. And we bring community together in these healthy ways, and we just support one another. We have a Heartbeat of the Drums event coming up. Anyhow, we did a prayer bead workshop last year, and survivor families attend it, and they can write prayers and make beads and roll them, and then create whatever they'd like to create. And at that event, a young person, a youth whose mother had been murdered, typed her own prayer, and she shared it with us, and then she rolled it into her beads and she made a necklace. And to me, I'm like, that's everything. That she's in a community of people that love her, support her, that she's not alone, and that we can provide this healing space to process what we're going through. And so, yes, a bill really matters. And when we're with families and we have these spaces of healing, those are the moments that really stick with me, that make every effort worth it, that it makes you, I'll do 10 more bills if I have to, so that little girl knows that her mother's life wasn't lost in vain, right? Mm-hmm. And that we'll work so hard to keep moving and keep doing this work and to create change. And so, you know, the highs are really high, the lows are really low, but we're here for the families.
Wow, that's so touching.
Yeah.
Okay. My next question is, how do you take care of yourself in this work? I imagine it must be very tough to have to, you know, carry all of these stories with you and treat them so carefully, and it's a really hard topic. So how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah, I have a really amazing teams. I'll say that first and foremost. Like, I get to do this interview and share about the work, but behind me are so many who show up each and every day to also do this work. And so I don't do it alone. And we're really thoughtful about not just doing community building with our people where we have these healing spaces, but as a team. Like, we check in as mothers, we check in as community members who are processing or healing. And, you know, we've done meditations as a team together. We make salve together. We do retreats, and really just giving people the time to process. Like, this, we have so much to do and we aren't machines, you know, so let's rest. Let's make sure you can have time to self-care. You know, two members are off today because it was so hard to work over the weekend, you know, and like, yes, take it off, take what you need, you know, and when we are ready, when you feel good, that's when we do the work. We don't push people and burn them out. And you know, so meditation has been something that's been life-changing for me.
Wow.
Being outside, being with my community. I love eating together and serving food and being with the kids, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful I have elders that have guided me to and check in on me. Like, how are you doing? How are you really doing, you know? And so I'm well cared for by my family and friends, and I try to also give that grace and flexibility to my teams who do this hard work.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'm so glad that you're able to have that community of support behind you, and you're able to take a step back when you need to.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. How can people in your community, outside of your community, here in the newsroom, how can we ensure that the stories of missing Indigenous women and girls are told and heard on the biggest level possible?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So, you know, there's lots of ways that people can be involved. There's lots of ways that people can be agents of change. Sometimes we think, you know, sometimes it is showing up to a rally. That collective power, like we saw in Anchorage, you know, not too long ago, that is really powerful. It motivates and inspires people to do something, right? So there's these big ways of showing up at a rally, and there's also really powerful small ways. Have that conversation in your circle of friends, you know, especially for allies. Like, those might not be spaces I have access to. You know, if you see this on the news, bring it up with someone, talk to someone about it, you know. Having those intimate conversations in our small circles are just as powerful as rallying on the streets, as writing your representative. You know, there are so many ways that people can take action. I also really encourage people, if you have a skill set, you know, donate it. You want to teach beading with us, or, you know, and of course, like always, donations, like monetary donations. We all work from nonprofits. Those always go a long way too. But don't underestimate the power of conversation with family and friends. They're just as powerful. Writing your representatives, you know, doing things on the back end that might be less visible can make a really big difference.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing. So, do you think that MMIP and MMIWG is a topic that's discussed enough? Like you just mentioned, like conversation is important. Do you think that there's enough conversations happening right now?
No, I think it still needs to grow, you know. Definitely there's a lot of people who this is still new to them, and that's good and fine. But until this is more normalized, I don't want like violence to be normalized, but we need people to know that this is a real issue that isn't just of the past. There's a lot of cases that, of course, like have injustice that need resolve, And sadly, this is a lifetime issue that we're still dealing with today, that we still have continued violence happening today. And so we need to keep talking about it until it stops completely, and sometimes people will hear about it like on TV with the TV shows that are coming up. And those are sometimes people's first entry point into this issue, right? And then we need to dig deeper and learn, okay, that was something on TV, and this is what's really happening in my community, and how can I be involved? How can I support them? Or how can I help raise awareness, And so that conversation needs to keep going. I thank media for being a part of the solution, because sometimes the media coverage has caused harm. And I think we're making it better. I think like having real conversations, having families be able to speak for themselves is really important, and it really matters. So yeah, I appreciate media and getting our voices out there and keep on raising the issue, especially when erasure happens, when we have administration that erases data and reporting and all these things happening. We want people to know we haven't forgotten, and that we're still talking about it, we're still meeting with legislators, we're still taking these news interviews, and that their loved ones haven't been forgotten, that we're still going and we're still talking about it.
Got it, thank you. So we touched a little bit on it just now, but do you think, I think I know the answer to this, but do you think that MMIWG is talked about enough in the news and media and social media?
So there's definitely an opportunity for more coverage in these cases. The Urban Indian Health Institute put out a report not too long ago where they did a media analysis where how many of the Indigenous cases were covered and how many weren't, and a huge majority of them weren't. And so, and sadly, there are a lot of cases to cover, both, again, ones that happened a while ago and ones that are coming up, lifetime, recent ones. And we just need attention so that there's accountability as well, where we aren't seeing maybe systems work or like their system fails. We need to keep talking about it because there's lots of gaps happening in the justice system in lots of areas where families aren't getting the due diligence on those cases and there isn't closure. And so we need to keep talking about it to keep pressure on these things working for us. There are agencies responsible for doing this part, whether it's the investigation or this step or this step or this step, right? We need to work together. And when we talk about it and we uplift it, like it makes transparent, like what is or isn't happening. And that's going to be important ongoing as we work for justice.
Okay, thank you. Okay. This might be a follow-up question to what I asked earlier, but for our listeners, what are some meaningful actions that they can do? Like you mentioned conversations, like if they see this, talk about it with someone. Mm-hmm. So can we explain a little bit more about what listeners who are watching this or listening to this on their podcast, what can they do?
Yeah, so thank you for tuning in, first of all. I think that's a huge deal. I don't take for granted that people take time out of their precious day or night or whatever it looks like to learn about this issue and to see how they can be involved. And so, reiterating, having conversations in your family or circle or your workplace if that's appropriate, depending on what you work at. But one of the things that I do say is like, we see that this has happened over time, over and over and over again, and that points to a systemic issue, and that means we need a systemic solution, and that involves everyone. So allies, getting behind Indigenous-led efforts like what's happening here in Alaska, and people showing up, show your support or help care for the people who are advocating. We like to do care packages for the people who are on the ground. Those things matter a lot, that care that we were talking about. Donating if you can, showing up at events if you can, if there's a skill you want to share or that you can offer, there's so many ways. Or, if you're active on social media, share those posters, share the articles, all of that makes a big difference, and it only takes a second to share. And I think the other part is it can be a really hard place for advocates to, not everyone speaks up because it's hard and it's difficult, or you're worried about what might happen to you. There's people out there in our communities who know what's happening in some of these cases, and enough is enough. We have to choose what is right, and we have to speak up and know that the truth will protect us, and that we need to like speak up, use anonymous tip lines, like come forward, you know. I think that there's a lot of things that need to be revealed in our communities on the ground, and it's scary to speak the truth, but this is how we do it, you know. Our families are worth it. They chose to speak up and share their stories, and we give back by uplifting their voices in that truth and standing by them. So,
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being on this podcast episode. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
I just, I think I'd like to wrap up with, you know, just sending a message to families that we haven't forgotten, that we know that this is a priority. There can be lots of distracting things happening, but we're here for you. You know, people shared their stories and we haven't forgotten. In reciprocity, we're here for them, we got them. And also that tribes have the right to data sovereignty, right? We've seen the impact of us having our own information by us and for us, information about our people for our people, and tribes have the right to do that and to make change and to self-determine what that change looks like, and we support that. And there's lots of ways that that can be applied, but data sovereignty is truly like a really powerful tool that I hope to see grow here in Alaska, to really achieve more justice on all fronts. And yeah, I hope that's a continued conversation, because it's a powerful tool that we can all get behind and have as a shared language.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, Koyana, for having me.